Hey guys, welcome to another marvelous video. And today I'm going to talk about some of the cheesiest, trashiest 80s creature features and splatter thrillers that were secretly great and way ahead of their time. First of all, 80s B horror didn't know anything about subtlety. They were either extremely grimy and the bleakest imagination of the rest of the world, or some dark and raunchy comedy and suddenly turned into a messy gorefest. And you'll be absolutely freaked out by some of the grotesque-looking monsters, which are more like an authoritarian implant than a supernatural occurrence. However, the low-budget production and lack of elaborate creative team didn't allow these films to be as successful as a big Hollywood production. But for the 80s and 90s horror-loving kids, these used to be our childhood nightmares. So if you want to know what's so great about these 80s trashy horror films, hang tight till the end of this video, and let's get started. The Toxic Avenger, 1984. So, my first pick is from this sludge of 80s trashy B-culture features, is The Toxic Avenger, released in 1984 by Trauma Entertainment. Founded in 1974 by Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Herz, the studio started with the raunchiest sex comedies like Squeeze Play. After working on Rocky, Kaufman later came up with the idea for a health club horror film. Back then, the genre of horror was evolving in different ways. While some visionary filmmakers were still experimenting with it, others were calling it an absolute dead end. That's what triggered Kaufman, who wanted to make a genuine horror film. I mean the one that'll scare the hell out of people. Well, The Toxic Avenger is a straight-up trashy horror, but it was Kaufman's way of speaking against authoritarianism and the environmental collapse due to industrialization, albeit most bizarre and grotesquely. The film revolves around a skinny and timid janitor named Melvin, who gets brutally bullied by a group of gym rats. These freaky dudes have a really weird and dangerous habit of playing a hit-and-run game on the road. Once, they pulled a prank on Melvin by forcing him to wear a pink tutu and kiss a sheep. Humiliated by these bullies, Melvin tried to escape and was accidentally exposed to radioactive waste. Even worse, his body caught on fire, kicking off a metamorphosis that transformed him into a grotesquely deformed but towering masculine figure. And that's how our Toxic Avenger was born. But that's not all. Having realized that he has an immense level of super strength, he picks up his janitor mop and plans to cleanse society of corruption. Toxic Avenger has all the bizarre but brutal attack sequences, like those scenes where he stuffs a female criminal's body into a dryer, or tracks a thug down to a restaurant and shoves his hands inside a deep fryer until they turn into crispy hand fries. The film was made on a very modest budget of $500,000, but just look at the practical effects on Melvin. I think for a low-budget DIY film like this, achieving this kind of monstrous look was a really big deal. I think Toxic Avenger's greatness lies within its blatant mockery of the 80s gym culture. Everyone was chasing a particular body type and crushing others with the weight of heavy criticism just because they lacked a perfect physique. The film actually made sharp commentary on the conventional idea about masculinity and showed the hypocrisy of a world where strong masculinity means violence and rage. Chud, 1984. Chud, or Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers, is one of the most exquisite gorefests that the 80s have given us. Released the same year as The Toxic Avenger, Chud was based on the same anti-government and anti-industrialization sentiment. But Chud also focuses on the plight of marginalized communities and homeless people miserably surviving in the dark sewer tunnels and subway lines. Very unnecessarily, the film features three protagonists, whose stories gradually come together as they uncover why New York City's homeless population is disappearing without a trace. We've got the owner of a local homeless shelter, AJ, played by Daniel Stern, an intense police officer, Bosch, played by Christopher Curry, and a photographer named The George, played by John Hurd. So yeah, a pretty terrific cast for such a trashy film. However, despite a flawed screenplay and too many unnecessary subplots, the three actors delivered top-notch performances that especially make the experience of watching Chud so memorable for us. Even in a very brief sequence, you find legendary actors John Goodman and Jay Thomas playing cops who were attacked by the monster. Turns out it's the government after all that's been illegally storing radioactive toxic waste beneath Manhattan, transforming some of the underground dwellers into flesh-eating monsters known as Chuds. Now, speaking of the creature, I must talk about the most iconic thing in the film, the creature design. Despite being a low-budget setup, the chuds really looked like their flesh and skin had rotted and turned into a slimy, wrinkled layer that no longer looked like human skin. Even their eyes, although pretty exaggerated, glow in the dark, which kinda makes them look like some otherworldly creatures taking shelter in the tunnel. Maybe that was an intentional choice. When the designer himself is legendary Oscar-winning John Callejon Jr., the gore effects were crazy, especially in that scene where an investigating team entered the sewer and faced a hellish massacre. Some of them were ripped apart from their waist, completely exposing their inner organs and skeletons that might give you an ick. Well, I was unsettled for some time and badly regretted watching this movie with a chicken wing in my mouth. The Deadly Spawn, 1983. 80s creature features have shown us the kind of creativity that only legends can have. Creating a vicious-looking monster on a shoestring budget is not an easy task, but John Dodds effortlessly created the Spawns in a film with a production budget of only $25,000. The Deadly Spawn features a giant three-headed monster made of red and veiny muscles with their sharp and needle-like teeth, which were made of dental molds. I still can't believe that a group of movie nerds made this film only to brandish their love for gore, because as far as I know, the director of the film, Douglas McEwen, never made another movie after this one. The story isn't much of a charm because the whole of it is set in a single location, a house where the residents get attacked, killed, and eaten by these spawns. The film opens with a meteorite crash in a New Jersey town, releasing these spawns on Earth. To seek shelter, they crawl their way into a dark basement of a house owned by a couple, Sam and Barb. They also have a whole gang of children in their house, their two sons, Pete and Charles, and their teenage cousins, Ellen and Tom. One morning when Sam goes down to the basement, he's eaten by the spawns. But the most amazing scene of all comes right after this. So a while after, when Sam doesn't come back, Barb goes down to look for him, when suddenly a hand fell on her shoulder, giving a friggin' jump scare to the entire audience. Well, that hand definitely belonged to Sam, but the rest of his body was inside the spawn's mouth. The sneaky little spawn just played a nasty trick on Barb before ripping her face apart. The most hilarious thing about this movie is that it shows all kinds of continuity errors for a low-budget film. But you know what? If you want to watch a 1 hour and 20 minute long non-stop monster attack in the basement with some crazy plot points that are hilariously funny, this one is a great pick for you. Pumpkinhead, 1988. Stan Winston is the legendary name behind so many epic-scale monster designs, like the Predator and the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, and he redesigned the Xenomorph in Aliens. So in 1988, when he made his debut as a director with a movie called Pumpkinhead, we already knew it was going to be a nightmare-inducing creature eating people alive throughout the film. But Winston delivered way more than anyone expected. The film revolves around a father, Ed Harley, played by Lance Henriksen, living in a small village in the mountains. One day, when his little son Billy is killed by a group of bikers who accidentally hit him before running away, Ed goes berserk. He takes his boy to a local witch, asking her to resurrect the kid, but the witch offers him another solution, a plan of revenge instead. After a bloody and bizarre ritual, they awaken the demon of vengeance, Pumpkinhead, with claws as sharp as blades. However, Winston, being the legendary artist he is, made this ferocious beast through animatronics and impressive practical effects. But it still made the monster move smoothly, which looks pretty realistic on screen. In my opinion, Pumpkinhead is a typical late 80s grimy horror with a gloomy atmosphere that's unsettling from the very beginning, even before the monster appears in the story. The Blob, 1988. Before adapting Stephen King's works into some of the most iconic movies of his career, Frank Darabont co-wrote a film with Chuck Russell, and the film was a cult masterpiece known as The Blob. The 80s version of The Blob reimagines the 1958 classic, but with a different approach. In the 1950s version, The Blob was far less graphic and far less aggressive than the 1988 remake, looking more like a huge pile of red jello. But the 1988 Blob turned the creature 10 times more aggressive than the previous one. The story takes place in Arborville, California, where a small meteorite crashes in the woods. A homeless man discovers a translucent, fleshy mass that attaches to his skin and starts melting it. Found by 3 high schoolers, Brian Flagg, played by Kevin Dillon, a cheerleader, Meg Penny, played by Shawnee Smith, and Paul, played by Donovan Leitch. The man is rushed to the hospital, but there, the blob monster totally consumes the man before targeting Paul as its next victim. Chuck and Frank make a different origin story for the blob monster, which is not in the original. While the 50s blob was a totally extraterrestrial thing, the 80s blob turned out to be a bioengineered substance planted by the US government. Tony Gardner is the man behind the iconic design of the blob, which operates like a giant stomach, producing an acidic substance that digests the victims alive when they're conscious and visible inside the paint transparent mass. Now that's the most clever way of showing a death scene, because here we're not just terrified of this alien monster, but the act of dying itself is so naturally scary and panic-inducing that some scenes from the film are still unforgettable. Like that kitchen scene where a diner cook gets attacked by the blob as it reaches up out of the sink and grabs him by his face, almost folding him in half, before violently pulling him into the tiny pipe structure. That scene was hands down the most horrific monster attack sequence of that decade. Critters, 1986. Back in the 1980s, if you wanted to make an outer space alien that was supposed to look both menacing and funny at the same time, you had to call the legendary Chiodo brothers, who mastered the art of creating some terrifying predators with the most ridiculous looks. Critters was one of them, although upon its release it was heavily criticized for being a Gremlins ripoff. Actually, back at that time, B-movie producers wanted to cash in by remaking or totally imitating an already successful franchise. So I think the instructions were probably to make a low-budget Gremlins. But Chiodo Brothers made these cute little furballs look like they came straight out of hell. Well, originally known as Krites, they came from space, by the way. After breaking free from an asteroid prison, they crash-landed in Grover's Bend, a fictional town of Kansas City, and ate the livestock and residents of the town before finally entering the Brown family. Also, 2 intergalactic bounty hunters were sent to Earth to look for the critters and take them back to where they belonged. Critters was a commercial success back in the day, and even the critics liked it. So very naturally, they went on to create a long-lasting franchise of Critters, making 3 subsequent sequels, as well as a 2019 reboot and a TV series. But honestly, nothing came close to the original, where these demonic furballs used their own intergalactic profane language to argue with the cat of the Brown family. Hobgoblins, 1988. Back in the 80s, producers were so obsessed with Gremlins that they made more and more parodies only to get bashed by the critics, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it a Gremlin parody. Rather, it would be best to compare them with Critters. Just like Critters, they also came from outer space, which is fine, but just stop right there because from here on, everything gets hilariously nonsensical. The story follows a night guard at a local movie studio, Kevin, whose clumsiness gets out of hand. So a senior called McCready asks him to never open the secured film vault in the basement. But, very naturally, after McCready leaves, a thug sneaks inside and the vault gets accidentally unlocked, releasing these tiny outer space monsters to venture out in the world after staying locked in for nearly 30 years. Their unique capability is that they'll make you hallucinate your wildest fantasies before eating you alive. But the most ridiculous thing about the movie is that these goblins are visibly nothing more than some furry puppets, which aren't even animated. Even in the attack scenes in the movie, you can clearly see the actors holding the toys and shaking them to pretend they're being attacked by these goblins. And there's more, especially the scene where the 2 teenagers fight each other with garden rakes for an absurdly long time that makes no real sense in this movie. Despite the Gremlins and Critters dominating the world of creature features for quite a long time, I still admire those silly-looking tiny monster puppets which had no business looking so cute in this film. But that's the fun of Hobgoblins. It'll give you nothing that really makes sense for this premise, and that's why it's so effortlessly funny. The Stuff, 1985. When Larry Cohen made The Stuff in 1985, Hollywood was filled with creature feature B-movies releasing almost every year in abundance. But Cohen did something that changed the way we can imagine a creature horror. Larry just wanted to say that anything can be scary, but the real horror will come when an entire population is controlled by corporate greed. The film begins with mining workers discovering a mysterious white gooey substance bubbling out of the ground. As they find it delicious and creamy, they decide to store it and sell it on the market under the brand name called The Stuff. But it doesn't take much time for the customers to understand that the stuff can actually move on its own. While attacking, this thick yogurt-like cream flows out of the surface and slowly slides up the wall to trap its victim by smothering them. In one of the most technically impressive sequences, a guy gets smothered by the stuff while being trapped in his bedroom. Cohen is famously known for his strong political commentary disguised as horror, and The Stuff can be probably his biggest example of that. Without using any monster whatsoever, just using gallons of ice cream, yogurt, and a fire extinguisher foam, he made us face the truth of blind consumerism and corporate manipulation, the 2 most dangerous phenomena that are even more relevant today. Which is why, despite being a groundbreaking horror of the 80s, The Stuff matters today way more than it did in the 80s. Night of the Creeps, 1986. Fred Decker's 1986 splatter horror Night of the Creeps is a love letter to horror and all the legendary directors of this genre. Night of the Creeps has two different timelines. One is in 1959 during an alien invasion, and then in the 1980s when most of the story's plot unfolds. The film opens with a 1959 timeline in an alien spaceship when an alien is desperately trying to stop a container from being launched into space, but to no avail. The container crash lands on Earth near a parked car with a couple inside. As the boy goes up to see what's going on, a slime of black-colored alien slugs comes out of the capsule and straight goes down his throat. Meanwhile, the girl in the car gets killed by a man with an axe. Cut 2. We move to the 1980s college campus, where our protagonist Chris Romero, named after the legendary director George Romero, and his best friend James Carpenter J.C. Hooper, named after John Carpenter and Toby Hooper, want to join a college fraternity. But their frat president has asked them to take on a challenging task before they can join, and that task is to steal a dead body from the lab. Now, in the lab, Chris and James discover the frozen dead body of that boy from the 50s inside a cryo chamber. But it still ain't dead thanks to the black alien slugs keeping him alive. It's not just Chris and James, but each character in the movie has a surname that pays tribute to the horror filmmakers. Even starting from the 50s timeline to some of the shots in the 80s, they all clearly bear a sign of being a parody of the classic creature or alien movies. The absolute show stealer of the film is Tom Atkins, playing a chain-smoking, depressed investigator, Ray Cameron, who's given up on his life. The film didn't do much good at the box office, but it's still considered one of the earliest meta-horror movies, directed by a movie nerd who just wanted to pay a heartfelt tribute to the legends of horror who literally raised an entire generation of horror freaks. Slugs, 1988. 1988's most mean-spirited monster thriller, Slugs came out during a transitional time for genre movies. When the 80s gore subculture is still all over the plot, you can feel the 90s sense of realism creeping through some sense of the visuals that looked extremely realistic and way grimmer than the 80s casual horror comedies. Directed by Juan Piquer-Simon, the story takes place in a rural town where a leaking toxic waste dump accidentally infects the local sewer line. This chemical sludge mutates an entire population of garden slugs into ravenous, flesh-eating monsters that harbor a deadly brain-exploding parasite. Our protagonist, the local health inspector, Mike Brady, finds out about the bizarre attacks by these slugs, mostly after a local drunk is eaten alive and a couple is eaten by these slugs in their bedroom. I remember that specific cabbage-cutting scene where a woman unknowingly chops the cabbage along with a slug hidden inside. And then, that salad scene where a man takes a spoonful of salad with some slugs in it and undergoes a grotesque transformation due to these parasitic worms. To heighten the most realistic sense of horror, Juan Piquer-Simon used some real slugs along with thousands of worms made of rubber molds. However, despite the modern approach, the punk and trashy horror soundtrack used in this film still maintains the spirit of that 80s grindhouse aesthetic. Alright, so that's it. These are some of the coolest creature features from the 80s, which are never going out of style. The films I discussed in this list might have followed a simple formulaic structure of a creature feature, but each of them is pretty distinctly amazing. And that's why I think these are some of the greatest recommendations from my side to those who love horror and grew up with it. On that note, this video's over, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that when we get more 80s horror movies, you find out first. And don't forget to leave a comment down below to mention your favorite 80s monster horror. Until then, goodbye. We'll see you in the next one. And as always, stay marvelous.